politically incorrect segment tonight. Why are we still calling it the March for Science and not the liberal environmentalist march? Face it, the March for Science is a dumb name. Nobody is opposing science, and liberals at the rally weren't even there to support science. With me now, Executive Director of Climate Action Campaign, Nicole Capritz, and from ClimateDepot.com, Mark Morano. Nicole, Mark, thanks for being here.
Good afternoon.
Thank you.
All right, guys, this is part of a series we're doing on climate change. We have 4 different segments that we're doing. We talked about the politics of it yesterday. Today, we want to talk about the science of climate change specifically. So I want to basically pit you guys against each other. I want to ask you, and Mark, I'm going to start with you for the first answer. Liberals say that climate change is man-made, that our actions, our carbon emissions, what have you, has impacted the climate, the temperature of the Earth, and that it's all our fault, and therefore we should fix it. Convince me why that is or is not true.
Well, for one reason, the data does not support a significant human influence to the point where you can even measure it. And that includes effect on sea level. Sea level's been rising the past 10,000 plus years. It's shown no acceleration. In fact, a former Obama energy undersecretary just came out, a scientist, and said there's been a slowdown and no acceleration in sea level. Temperatures, even though they claimed hottest years, don't exist. It's within the margin. Essentially, the global warming pause still continues in the satellite record. It's unadjusted. There are hundreds of factors that influence the climate. Carbon dioxide's not the control knob. As a journalist, I've worked with scientists, the Nobel Prize-winning scientists, MIT climate scientists down the road, and they literally go after this consensus. The consensus we hear about, whether it's 97%, which was pulled from thin air, or the United Nations, which is supposed to be the world's top scientists. The United Nations is actually a political lobbying organization, their climate panel, that lobbies to make global warming sound worse than it could ever possibly be. And also they lobby because they're in charge of the solution. So it's been politicized. But I can assure you, and not just me, but scientists from these institutions. In fact, there are scientists that put men on the moon at NASA who have organized against the current scientists at NASA, Gavin Schmidt and others, who are just activists in charge of NASA trying to scare the public with data that is unsupportable.
Right, and I guess that's my skepticism with the wideness of their claims here. Nicole, let me ask you this. I mean, there have been scientists at some of these top agencies, people that were widely respected in their field, and I'm talking about at NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association. They fudged their numbers. How can we trust what they tell us about these enormous things, their predictions, or what we need to do if we can't trust them to actually tell us the truth about the data?
Well, I was so happy to hear Mark actually acknowledge that 97% of scientists agree that we're in a climate crisis and we must address it to protect human health and our kids' future. And secondly, there actually is no truth behind the fact that there was a politicization of the science. But regardless, at the end of the day, when we burn oil, when we burn gas, when we burn coal, we are polluting the air. And that pollution is harming kids' health. It's harming seniors' health. Why wouldn't we want to shift to a clean energy economy? So setting aside whether you believe in human-caused climate change or not, let's create that 21st century economy. Let's position America as a leader in the world economy and figure out how to have clean air and clean water.
Right, and let me go back just to the thing that you said at the beginning. I think this is an interesting point. It's probably the most used talking point on both sides of this debate, and that is the 97% of climate scientists are in consensus here. And I assume you're referring to the study done by John Cook, where he looked at different climate papers and determined that 97% of them were in consensus. I mean, do you know the methodology that he used? Because it's been highly called into question.
I actually am not familiar with that particular study, but I think there is consensus, and Mark actually agreed that the bulk of the scientists internationally agree that there's a climate crisis.
And no, Mark, let me interrupt, Nicole, just for a second, because Mark, speak to that, because I think it's worth talking about the methodology in this study, because it's the primary statistic that a lot of people, a lot of activists, climate activists, use as their arguments. It's actually a faulty study.
Yeah, actually it is. In fact, first of all, Al Gore in 1992 actually said nearly all scientists agree. So they started this idea, this talking point way back in the early 90s when they didn't have any data. So what happened is they did several studies. Before the John Cook study, they actually did one where they surveyed scientists, and they came up with 77 scientists, anonymous scientists. We don't know who they are. We don't know their names. We don't know their background. But we do know that they answered the 2 questions they asked, and the 77 anonymous scientists scientists formed the basis for the first 97% claim a few years back. Then John Cook came out, I think it was 13,000 or 14,000 peer-reviewed studies, and they looked at how many accepted the premise of carbon dioxide driving the climate, or at least
carbon dioxide
influencing the climate.
If I can interject, Mark, because I think that's like a red herring, this whole argument. At the end of the day, could we get agreement that when you burn oil, you burn gas, you burn coal, you pollute the air? Do we have agreement on that? Because regardless of whether you believe it causes climate change or not, is there not a human health crisis that we're confronting? And don't you want your kids exposed to clean air and clean water?
Absolutely no. You asked me a question. There's no human health crisis whatsoever. We've radically improved our air and water quality while at the same time economic growth. The only way renewables, we would have a crisis if we mandated renewables. Yes, I agree with you on that. But first of all,
that's interesting because actually even Fox News suggested or said, they didn't suggest, that more than half of Americans live in counties with polluted air. Do we really want our kids exposed to poisonous chemicals? Do you really want your kids drinking polluted water?
No, let me interject just for a second, because I don't want to get us off the topic. Like I said, this is a part of a series. I do want to stick to just the science of climate change here. Nicole, I actually don't disagree with you here. I mean, there's a lot of pollution. It does impact people's health. I mean, a lot of the health problems I think that we suffer these days is because of the toxicity of our environment. I don't disagree with you on that. I think we should do something about it. But for the point of this segment, I do want to stay just on the science of climate change, man-made climate change, whether our actions, our carbon emissions are the primary driver of the changing temperatures of the Earth. And that's, I'm going to ask to you, Nicole, what I asked to Mark at the beginning of the segment is, I mean, do we have proof of that before we're giving billions and billions of our tax money to initiatives or to the United Nations to try to fight this?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, we happen to both be in San Diego, California, which is the home of international climate science at Scripps Institute of Oceanography. This is where the iconic chart used nationwide, or worldwide, sorry, that demonstrates the increase of carbon dioxide in the air, again, once the Industrial Revolution started and we started burning oil, coal, and gas at such accelerated rates, in such accelerated amounts, that carbon emissions just went up. It's just a fact. I mean...
Well, tell me the mathematics of it then, because that, I mean, I work in a numeric way. What percentage, what percentage do my actions, my carbon emissions impact climate change? If we're damaging the Earth's atmosphere, how much do we mathematically actually impact that?
I mean, I don't know the exact percentage, but the point is, all we know for sure is that starting with the Industrial Revolution, right? Starting when we started doing industrial processes that were burning coal, oil, and natural gas in a way we had never done in human history previously, the chart suddenly goes up in a trend line significantly, and we're now seeing levels that have never been seen in human history. And at the end of the day, isn't that all that matters? If carbon dioxide
that's not all that matters,
actually polluting our lungs, is actually poisoning the air, then shouldn't we do something about it?
That is actually scientifically invalid to say carbon dioxide is polluting and poisoning our lungs. These are Orwellian phrases that have no scientific meaning, and they're bastardizing science. She's talking about a CO2 chart that's rising. Yeah, CO2 is up in the atmosphere, but you go back to about 1850, we were in a little ice age, and then we started industrialization, but 80% of our CO2 came after about World War II. And a lot of the glaciers and temperature increase we had started around the turn of the 19th century. So a lot of that warming was a natural warming that couldn't possibly have been attributable to rising CO2.
Mark,
and in terms of it being at record high, wait, no, it's not record high. Geologists say it's one of the lowest levels they've ever had in the geologic history of the Earth.
I'm going to turn this back around on you. The one guy sitting behind a computer in Omaha, Nebraska? No,
Dr. Robert Gegengack, the former chair of the University of Pennsylvania.
Has he gone through peer review? Has he been in Nature, the only magazine that scientists believe is credible?
It's not controversial. It's not controversial that CO2 was much, much higher in the geologic past of the Earth. Get with the program. The question is, okay, it's not true that CO2 is much higher in the Earth's geologic.
I'm going to have to cut you short. My issue with this whole thing, and I guess I sort of got my question answered, sort of not. I mean, my question still is, if you can't tell me mathematically exactly how much our carbon emissions impact the changing environment of the Earth or the changing climate of the Earth, then I don't know why I should give you my hard-earned money to fix that. And we will have to pick this up at another time because we're out of time. Nicole, Mark, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
All right, guys, our final tipping point of the night. Trump's first